I will keep my part very short because the whole goal of today is to hear from you as far as what you see as viable options for working on this nitrate challenge. So I'm going to do, not that button, a really short introduction. I'm going to try to keep it 5 to 7 minutes at most. And then we're going to spend the rest of the time brainstorming practices and identifying how we can incentivize and get more implementation of those practices. So I want to hear from you for what's working. So we're just going to kick off for why we care. So from a farm business side, particularly this year with fertilizer prices, it's really important to optimize our nitrogen management and our irrigation management. It has implications on farm. You all know that quite well. The other two that I really think are critical is we're talking about rural vitality. So we've got, in the state, there's 90 small communities. I should have looked up for Upper Big Blue, but there's 90 statewide that are above 5 parts per million and trending upwards. So we're talking, and then we've got thousands of wells above that. So we're talking millions of dollars in filtration needs in the next 20 to 30 years. So it's a question of how do we pay for this in our rural areas with small population base? And then the last, and the reason why we have to do all the filtration is that health impact. So it's the standard of 10 parts per million for nitrate in water was based on blue baby syndrome, if you've heard that, which was identified back in the 1940s. And so infants that drink that water, so like if you make formula with it, it binds to the hemoglobin in your blood and they cannot breathe essentially. You can't get blood or you can't get oxygen into your blood. But what's been really fascinating from a scientific stance, but concerning on the health side over the last 10 to 20 years, a growing body of research shows that it is a lifetime health risk. So at levels 10 and sometimes below 10 even, it's for expectant mothers, there's several different negative birth outcomes, early pregnancy, loss of pregnancy, birth defects, and then pediatric cancer. Nebraska is consistently in the top 10. UNMC is saying that most likely that is from some of these compounds that are nitrate related. And then we've got colorectal cancer. It's also been linked to high nitrates in our water, as well as several thyroid issues that are very common in our state. So it's something that we don't want to sneeze at. Yeah.
You said early pregnancy. Did you mean early, like delivery, like premature birth?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
That's the better way to say it. Yes. Premature birth, which is also can lead to several other complications with those early term deliveries. Yes, sorry, not early.
This is kind of not quite as important, but we're not helping us anymore. But they always told us you want to watch your nitrate level in the water your cows drink.
Yeah.
You got the same problem with pigs.
Same problems in livestock. We just had a.
We're not having this anymore. That's what they always told us. I haven't heard any different.
Yes. Yeah. Your livestock shouldn't be drinking super high nitrate water for the same reasons. And I've asked. We did an extension article on it this last summer, and there's a lot of the vet school faculty are kind of trying to get a better handle on what levels have impact for different species. But yeah, for small livestock, generally it's not too much of an issue in the blue baby part because they're often on the mother. But like chicks, as we get more poultry in, there's concern there, as well as some of the pregnancy loss issues are water quality related as well. And feel free, we're a small group, totally stop, or if you've got comments, questions. And I just wanted to address a couple questions that we often hear is that, well, isn't this all just a legacy nitrogen problem? It's all stuff in the past. And I pulled out a couple of these from the study down in Hastings, and we've seen the same in other studies around the state, is that in that part of the state, it takes 20 to 30 years for the water on the surface to get down to the groundwater. So we're talking, if those levels are rising, that's reflecting practices that happened from 1991 to 2001. In other places that's, in our river valleys, it can be much shorter. So if you look at Platte Valley, even Big Blue, it's much closer to the aquifer, that alluvial aquifer. So it is reflecting practices that are only 5, 10, 20, it's much shorter time period. So it is some legacy, but we're not talking 50 years ago. It's much shorter than that. In most places, there are some places that are much longer time period. And then secondly, the other part that we saw when we did the nitrate sampling, and you might have already heard these because Dan Snow, who did the study, has done some of these reports for the NRD, but so they looked at it increment by increment. I think it was every 3 feet. They did measurements. Maybe it was every foot. I should have looked that up. But at any rate, what they found was that on average, we're still adding to the problem across those 30-some sites down there, is that on average, it was 30% up in that time period. 2011 to 2016, we added 30% more nitrogen. So we haven't solved this. There were some fields, and that's to me starting to we'll get to the field level piece, because that's to me where it gets really interesting. Because there were some fields that did do better. Another one I often hear is, isn't it just the turf, in town and the golf courses? And a little bit, but what they did, because they did across several different, these 4 different land use types in that study. And so consistently, both in Hastings and other places across the state, both for nitrate leaching and how much water is moving through that profile. Grass, whether it's turf or pasture, does better than dryland cropping, but dryland cropping still does better than pivot, and pivot still does better than gravity. So there's some variability within that, but consistently across sites we see it kind of falling out that way. And I think it's this combination of how much fertilizer is put on, how much water is put on. It's kind of. And then another one, I think this is my last of my questions that I often get is, aren't we already doing the best that we can? I would say yes and no, depends on your fields. On average, so the dollar amount was done up in northeast Nebraska. We could do the same. This is out of Upper Big Blue, but I think the Upper Big Blue numbers would be similar. What they found is that in excess fertilizer, with this year's prices, we're still talking $50 an acre on average. Some fields are doing better and some are doing worse, which, those get to be big numbers. And same on excess irrigation. So they found that if we set the benchmark as UNL's recommendation, which some people argue is still too high, but even at that, 77% of fields are above that. And then the excess irrigation was determined by when the crop was, when the soil moisture sensors are above field capacity. So still half the time we're up above field capacity. So we got plenty of room for improvement on both of those. So to me, the real question is field by field. That's where it gets really interesting. I'm just going to give a little bit of data. If you were here 2 years ago, I want to say, you might have seen this from Patricio Grissini at UNL, but I wanted to bring it up again. I'll walk you through this because it's a bit messy. But this is taking Upper Big Blue's field level phase reports and looking, nitrogen is across the bottom. So he determined what a benchmark was for efficient nitrogen use. The other side is your yield potential. So 100% means you're getting darn near close what we predict that field could get for maximum yield. So 100% would be full yield potential, and then it drops from there. And so kind of one way to think about this with pictures instead of numbers is up in that upper right-hand corner, you're getting high yield with lower nitrogen input. So that keeps the farmer happy, and that keeps the water happy because we're not having excess fertilizer. So about a quarter of our field, so this is field level, About a quarter of our fields fall in that category where we're like, good job, on both sides. Farmers are getting good yield and you're getting low fertilizer inputs. Then our other quadrants on the right, this is saying that you still are getting great yields. You're pushing, you're in that 90 to 100% of yield potential, but you're using a lot more fertilizer to get there. So that keeps the farmer happy in general. I mean, you're still wasting some money on fertilizer, but not too bad. But we lose a lot more of it to leaching. So that's sad for the fertilizer. And that's where most of our fields are, which isn't surprising. When nitrogen's cheap, insurance, we try to keep our yields high and don't worry so much about what's lost. The one that we see the least in is when you're getting poor yields and you're not using that much nitrogen. That's our 9% over here. And then the last one is when nobody's happy because you don't get great yields and you're using a lot of fertilizer and not getting great yields. And what's interesting is, as a whole, I mean, it's not true for an individual field, but as a whole, there's 133 pounds per acre difference. And there's not really a trend line across, if you look across it. There's not a trend line. So there's huge potential, I think, here for how do we move more fields up into that category where we're getting great yields using less fertilizer. Same information with water this time. So it's kind of the same. We did a benchmark of how much water was needed for that field, and then it kind of falls out from there. So we've got, in this case, we're actually doing a little better in our water management. We've got up over a third of the fields kind of in that happy category. But we still have a lot of, I mean, if you look at the tail on this, there's over 19 inches of irrigation water difference from top to bottom on this. And so if we can think about how these fields, how we can move them, we can make a big difference. Because this nitrate issue is both how you manage the fertilizer and how much water you're putting through your profile. Because if you do your nitrogen perfect, but you pour on 19 inches of water, it shoots it straight through the profile. So, point being, how do we move these things together? Get more efficient in our inputs with improved yields. So, that's all I wanted to say to set the stage. The rest of the time, I want us to, and we might even move our chairs so we can have a true kind of group discussion. I didn't know how many people, so I didn't want to move chairs so I knew how many people. All options are on the table. I will say, except for do nothing. That's my only ground rule. I think this, I would like to hope that you would agree that this is compelling enough to say we can make progress in some of these fields. The question is which ones are going to work best in your operations. We want to build off of each other's ideas. We're really not here to get in a huge debate. We can have a little bit of debate, but it's mostly brainstorming and adding to the ideas as we're kind of in that stage. We're restarting this discussion of what do we want to do. And as always, engage each other respectfully and ask plenty of questions of me and the other people in the room. So.